Okay, so now that we are here, let's talk about callbacks and promises. Go back to our IDE and then remove this. So let's go for array and this one. A callback would always look like this, where let's say array for each item console.log item. So this one is a callback function. Callback functions are functions that are passed in another method, which is this one, and is called when an event within the parent function has occurred. So the event that is happening here is when it's iterating over the array. Another example of a function that takes in a callback function is set timeout, which allows us to so I'm going to use array function here. Let's say this is a delay and we add it here. So that means this callback will be called after 1000 milliseconds. So the event is after 1000 milliseconds, it will call the function. Another is if we use XML HTTP request. So this one, select this is a request. So after doing the creating the request, we will go add another callback here using the add event listener. So once it's loaded, we will do an add event listener here. So I'm using the function instead of the arrow function compared to the set timeout because I'm using the this keyword, which means the scope is within the request itself. So if I do this, if the status is equals to 200, we will print out this dot response text, and we'll create open get with let's say this index.html. We want to print it out, and request.send. So given that, you can see that it has printed the HTML, and the delay comes after because there's a console log delay. If we increase the time to 5 seconds, you can see that after 5 seconds, the delay would show up. So these things that we see here, these are callbacks. The thing is, we can talk about promises next. The thing with promise is that we can transform a callback from a to a promise as long as the event only happens once. So like for this example, this will not work because the event for iteration depends on how many elements are there in the array. For this one, it only happens once, so we can transform it into a promise, and this one as well, we can transform it into promise. So let's try out the set timeout if we can transform it into a promise. So to be able to do that, I would create a new promise, let's say delay, and it is usually a function. So I'm going to create a function here. And then from here on out, I will return a new promise. So the function would take in, let's say, the delay. So this is the delay timeout. And then the promise would take in a function in itself. So let's try using the function keyword, which has a resolve parameter, which is actually a callback. So let's create the timeout. Let's just say, let's just say we do this console.log delay with, or actually it's not really the case. We can do this and then do the resolve, and then we want the delay timeout here. So once we are done, we can just do delay, and then we use the then part. Or actually, we can just well, I'll show it later what we can do. But this is actually the resolve function that we have put here. So if we replay this, let's say I did 5 seconds. We can see the delay and after delay happening. So we can replace this actually with just resolve, because resolve is a function. This is actually a function. Oops. Thus, if we do this, we are putting this one inside resolve, and that is being triggered by the set timeout. So like so, after 5 seconds it will show after delay, which works. Now for this example though, we can transform this into another promise, where let's say we XML promise is equals to a function that takes in, let's say, the method and URL. Then we return a new promise. Oops, not that one. We return a new promise, which is a actually a function that has two parameters, which is two functions, resolve and reject. And for this one, we do the same thing. New XML HTTP request. We add an event listener, which is a load, which is a function. And then if the status is equals to 200, we resolve with the response text. Else we reject with the error itself, so with the whole object. Then we add an open and get the method and URL and request.send. Now the thing is, if we want to try it out, XML promise get and the index.html. Then for the then part, we'll get the data. So response text is equals we'll console log it response text. And then for here on out, if there's an error, we'll add a catch because there's a reject. We know that there's a reject function error. Actually, we can do this. Instead of this, we just do error this dot status. We'll test it out first. We'll remove the original delay, or later on we'll remove that, but let's test this out first. So as you can see, it will print this out because there's an instance of index.js, but if there's no index.html, but let's say I tried index.js, there's an error, which is the error is 404, the status that we have put here. So I'll just remove this one because it's cluttering up our example. But as you can see here, because the status is 400, we created the new error that is the string is the status itself, and we show it on console.error, which we are seeing it here right now. So that is how we transform a callback into a promise, and then using XML, using then and catch to do our bidding. Now this is all fine and dandy, but there's a better way to code promises that are so let's just remove this. There's a better way to code promises instead of using another set of callbacks in this case. So one way is to create a function, let's say start, which has a keyword async. Actually, we can do this as well using the arrow functions. Let's say start2 is equals to async, and we can see it here. But let's try to use function first. So for this one, why do we need async? So that we can use the await keyword, because without the async or the asynchronous keyword, the await will not work, and it will return a syntax error. So for this one, we will have XML promise, await XML promise index.js, and we know that we will get a response text. So we'll do that. Response text is equals to await, and once we do this, so this is the then part, which we put it here. If we do this, we have to call the function first, start. So as you can see, this happens. So we are right on the money. But if we want, like, let's say, want to catch the error, what we can do is to, going back to our error handling, we do this. So see the similarities, like the then part, we put it after the response text, after the await, after getting the data from the promise, we get the response text, and this is the then part of the original promise that we did here. And then for the catch part is in this area. So if I do this, because there's no index.js in this server that we have, it will return an error. as you can see here. If we did this, there should be 2 errors that would show up, and that is how things work in using async await. We will be using a lot more of this later on. We can see that promises are really useful, or promises allows us to do asynchronous activities, and for it to be much more readable than having like a then and catch and all of that, we will be using this one. Now take note that if you transform a function into an async, this effectively becomes a promise itself. So take note of that. Now also take note though that we did what we did in XML HTTP request, where we transform it into a promise. There's already an existing promise for fetching resources, which is actually using the fetch keyword, where we just put in here, let's say HTML, and if we are going to add a method, we do this. Now the response would still have something, so if we want to get response text, we do another await response dot body. Alright, if this is if, let's say, if this will work. Oh, it's not a function, so let's try this out. Readable stream. No, not this one. Text. Yeah. So given this, we are able to print it out, the same thing. So instead of using the original, instead of using our own XML HTTP request, which we transform into a promise, we are able to do this one in essence. And of course, even if there's no, let's say there's no element, it will not return an error. It will just return an HTML because it still exists. So what we can do is we can do a response status not equal to 200. It will throw new error response dot status. So let's just try it out if it works. And as you can see, we did the same thing as what we did before. So I would like to also take the opportunity as well to teach about getting data from a browser using different method called post. Now, for those who have this course pack video saved locally, you would need to connect to the internet if you want to follow this one. So I would be using http://http:/bin.org/anything for this. And once we put in post, and then the body, because post would need some form of payload, which is the body, we will stringify. This is something that we can do to be able to send a data structure, which is an object. So let's say this is an object, and you want to send name, TJ Montserrat, and so on and so forth. So instead of sending it as a data, we send it as a string, which if we want to see it here, so const body is equals to json.stringify obj. We want to print it out first, and then because we can do, actually instead of doing this, we can just omit the last one because it has the same name, so we can do that. Can also create an options just for making sure that everyone knows what we are doing. So this is post and this is body, and then we put the options in this area. So let's see if it works. So as you can see, I've sent this body as part of the how do I say this, my payload. So if we look at the payload that we have sent to anything, the payload is below. This is the payload that we have sent, this one, which corresponds to here. And then this is the return of that URL that you are seeing right now. And you can see that the data that we have sent is correct. And these are the headers that they have received as well. And this is the JSON again that they have received. And it's a method post with the origin of, which is the URL that I'm using, or I mean the IP address that I'm using right now, and so on and so forth. So, post, so just take note, for post, we need a body payload. For get, we don't need a body payload. So that is something that we will be talking about later. So now that we are done, we can go to the next video.